Joint Chiefs of Staff come out, people who normally don't speak out, people like General Dempsey, Mullen, and McCraven. All of them have been very senior members of the American military, people who are hesitant to come out, very hesitant to come out and criticize the president, who, remember, is their commander-in-chief as well, right? They don't like to be seen to criticize the president, and yet they're kind of closing ranks, the former military establishment. And now you've got Esper and Milley as well, and questions already today about how the president's going to respond to this, and were we not quite this close to an election, would the defense secretary and the Joint Chiefs of Staff have to look at getting new jobs?
Okay, let's get some reaction to this. We're joined by Secretary Ray Mabus, who served as a Democrat governor of Mississippi. He was also serving as Secretary of the Navy under the Obama administration. Secretary, it's really good to have you with us. What did you make of General Milley's comments today? Was it overdue?
Well, I was really glad he did it. It's so incredibly important to reestablish that the military is an independent institution, that it's a neutral institution, that it's a non-political institution. But he was so late in doing it. It was 10 days from the time it happened. And it was only after so many other senior military people, active and retired, made strong statements about it. So, yes, I'm glad he did it, but he was so late in doing it that it left way too many questions, and it allowed President Trump to continue to try to politicize the military, as he has done pretty much through his entire administration.
Mr. Secretary, I want to ask you about the mood in the Pentagon today, because I'm sure you are in touch with some of your former colleagues in the US military. What are they saying to you? How is morale holding up?
Well, it's a very, very strange time. It's, as you pointed out, it's not normal. It's not usual that senior military people, either active or retired, speak out against their commander-in-chief. They are inculcated from the very first time they take the oath going into the military to be neutral, to serve whoever is elected to command. And this is just an incredibly different time. And I think the morale has gone up since the military leadership has begun to make these statements, to say, no, we're not going to be a part of this. No, we're not going to allow our military to be politicized. And I think that morale was pretty low. But I think that these statements, particularly by retired military people, and civilian, retired civilian officials, have been incredibly important for the morale there.
Mr. Secretary, can I ask you another question about the recent protests that we've seen, and specifically about the idea of symbols? We've seen these statues being pulled down around the country. We've seen NASCAR, Christian was doing an interview on it earlier in the program, NASCAR saying they're not going to have the Confederate flag at their rallies. We've also seen calls, which the president is resisting on Twitter, for the renaming of some military bases that are named after Confederate generals. What's your view on that?
Well, these bases, we got 10 military bases named after Confederate generals. They're named after traitors. They're named after people who took up arms against the country they had vowed to defend. And they need to be changed. It's way past time. These names were put in not right after the Civil War, but in the 1890s through 1920s, when the white power structure was reestablishing control in the South, when white supremacy was being reinstituted. And these generals that these forts are named for, first, they were traitors. Second, they just weren't very good at what they did. They weren't good generals for the Confederacy. And to continue to have a military that's 40% minority, that has to go to work and bases named after people who fought in a war, the sole purpose was to keep the institution of slavery, is just wrong. And it needs to change, and it needs to change now.
Secretary, you've been pushing for the Confederate symbol that exists within the Mississippi flag to be removed. There's now a Republican governor in charge in Mississippi. Why didn't you remove it when you were governor?
That is on me. That is my fault. I simply did not think of the symbolism that it required, and that it represented. We were trying to do so many things, and things like education and healthcare, but I should have done more. I definitely should have done more when I was governor 30 years ago.
Do you think there are a lot of Democrats who are saying they should have done more this past few weeks? I mean, there's a governor in Minneapolis, in Minnesota. There's a mayor in Minneapolis who's also a Democrat. I mean, these Democrats have been in charge of some of these police forces for some time.
Yes, they have. And it is not it's not a good point. It's not a point of honor that it took something like this to make these sweeping changes. I started pushing for the flag, for example, 20 years ago to be changed, but I didn't when I was governor. I woke up to the notion of how hurtful it was, of what a bad symbol it was, of how evil the things it represented were. But, it does take sometimes these massive, massive changes. And while you can never excuse past actions, if you can make basic fundamental changes, if you can alter your viewpoint, and if you can try to right the wrongs that have been around for ever since America was a country, then you need to do it now. It's never too late.
Yeah, maybe this is a tipping point. Maybe we are in for a sea change, but it's big of you to say that, Secretary, and it's very good of you to come on the programme. So thank you very much for your time and your comments tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, for more on this topic, let's bring in Ron Christie, former advisor, of course, to President George W. Bush. I'm sure you were listening across. That was quite interesting, isn't it? I'm sure there's a lot of Democrats, like he says, who are looking back and thinking, maybe I could have done more earlier.
Good evening to you, Christian. Absolutely. And I think of what was going on in Richmond, Virginia. Kathy and I had the opportunity to interview the mayor down in Richmond, an African-American mayor in a state that has always been run by the Democrats. And it makes you just wonder, why now? Is it just George Floyd, or is there a different mood that's sweeping across the United States, a movement that we haven't seen since the civil rights era in the 1960s?